Pulling the Trigger is sponsored by Easy Vape North Shore, the industry's leading direct retailer of the highest quality personal vaporizers, e-cigs, vapes, and Canadian-made e-juice. Located at 987 Marine Drive in North Vancouver, or you can check them out online at www.easyvapecanada.com. You can also donate to our Patreon account. Patreon is a membership platform that makes it easy for artists and creators to connect with their fans and get paid. That's at www.patreon.com/MarkHughesComic. And please like our Facebook page at facebook.com/PTG604. Welcome to Pulling the Trigger. I'm Mark Hughes, and this is my podcast. As always, produced, edited, posted by the wonderful Taylor Morey. Thanks, Taylor. Pulling the Trigger is brought to you by Jackal Events. Jackal Events is a Vancouver-based event organization company specializing in political events and comedy shows. The next Jackal Events event will be January 31st. Danny Polishuk live in Vancouver. As of right now, it's at the Rickshaw Theatre. That may be subject to change from what I've heard, but check it out. Like the event on Facebook. And tickets can be bought at www.picatic.com. That's www.picatic. Picatic. Here we are. This episode is being recorded on March 7th. You will be hearing it March 8th. And what's been going on for me? I did a show on the weekend for a cabaret at an event called The Carceral Cultures. It was this event put on by SFU, and it was a lot of academics who were involved in prison and the study therein, and the reasons and culture around prison and how people end up imprisoned. And I can honestly say it was probably the most left-leaning audience I'd ever been in front of in my life, and I was scared to death as soon as I walked in. I thought they'd made a horrendous mistake hiring me. I got hired because I'm an ex-con, as everyone knows, and they wanted someone with... all the performers had to have some voice or experience with I guess the prison industrial complex, really, like and the parts of society that send people to prison. I was one of only 3 people in attendance who had actually been to prison, though, which I thought was weird. I thought there'd be a lot more than that. But the show went off okay, so I'm glad to have done it, and I hope to do more like that. Those are always interesting. I find audiences that are, I guess, social justice oriented, I guess that's what it would fall under, not always the easiest audience for me, because obviously I just do what I do. So, but I can... I'm always up for the challenge, and I like doing comedy for just about anyone as long as the people are willing to be open-minded about it. So I don't, even if I do offend people, I've said this over and over again, I'm really trying not to. My goal is always laughter. My goal is always having a good time. And I think as long as my job is to do my best to make sure that I provide the best opportunity to laugh and provide the ammunition for laughter. And I think the audience's opportunity is to at least be open to laughing. Doesn't always match up, but you do what you can, and that's life in the big city. Had some controversy the last episode of Pulling the Trigger. Bill Watcott's episode. Some people didn't like that one. One person, he might have just been assing around. I don't know if he was telling the truth or not, or if he was just exaggerating, but he said he was going to try and get the episode taken down as hate speech. Report it to SoundCloud and iTunes. And then he even said at one point he hadn't listened to it. Then later on, through a bunch of arguing and stuff like that, and people chiming in and saying, how do you... there's nothing wrong with hearing alternate viewpoints, even if they are extreme. We can learn things from them, etc., etc. He said something to the effect of, I'm only humoring this guy because I'm resentful towards gay people, because I was diddled. And the funny thing is I thought that was a social justice warrior faux pas, shaming me or bringing up my sex abuse to try and correct me or criticize me or put me down. But I'll say what I said then. If it wasn't for a gay man raping me, I never would have found out about the prostate gland. So thank you. As I've said numerous times, this podcast is going to have a lot of interesting, unusual, and controversial people. Some of the views expressed will be ones that you are really interested in and find enlightening. Some of them are going to make you, or you're going to find repulsive. You're going to recoil from. You're not going to like them. And then it'll switch, and there'll be different. Some people think one thing, some people think other. And Bill's was an extreme one. I'm not going to lie, but I just found him interesting because, like, his antics are fucked up and they're silly, and like, he set precedents. Supreme Court of Canada twice. You know how hard it is to get into the Supreme Court once? He's been in there twice, and apparently a third case is coming. And say what you will about his message, but his behavior set precedent for what hate speech and hate and behavior that is hateful expression is. So now we know. Is his behavior good or anything? No, but I don't know. I find it interesting. I'm not going to defend it. I'm not going to explain it. It is what it is. I don't think that hiding from these kinds of ideas or people is the best way, or trying to suppress them totally and letting them fester in the dark. I think we should try and at least open up room for dialogue with these people who have these extreme ideas, hate and stuff like that. In fact, one of the things I know is that I'm not even that unique. I'm not the first comedian to interview people who are hate groups or someone involved with hate speech. There was a CNN special where a comedian named I always get his name wrong. I just want to make sure I get it right. A comedian named W. Kamau Bell interviewed KKK members, or one KKK member, and it was an interview, and they just talked. And it wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a debate. And he did it for the same reason I did. He just wanted to open up dialogue and maybe get other people to see, I guess, the humanity. There's no other way to describe it. And some people aren't going to like this, and they're going to think they're wastes of space and skin and should be executed. People took a chance on me, though. I committed many violent crimes. I got 8 years in prison for holding a meat cleaver to someone's throat in their own house. And people took a chance on me and forgave me and were willing to allow me back into the community. Some people even invited me into their homes with this violent past. So things like any kind of disgusting or vitriolic viewpoints, I just have a hard time really viewing people in a way that I feel they can be written off. And yeah, okay, call me a monster, call me whatever you want, but that's how I am. And there will probably be all kinds of guests who are gonna rub people the wrong way on pulling the trigger. And this next one, well, I don't think he will, but who knows? You never know. This next guest I have known for years and years and years. In fact, he worked at a halfway house that got surrounded by the police when I was arrested for robbing a bank. Tony Kennedy is a drug and alcohol counselor who works at a rehab, inpatient treatment center on the downtown east side. And he's been doing counseling and substance abuse work for 20 years. We had a very interesting talk about heavy metal, the changes in the rehab field, the things he has to do, his observations on it. And it's just, he's a really cool guy. He's really just kind of a mellow dude with really knowledgeable. And he's one of those guys that just had a really good chat with. And when I walked in, he was playing Megadeth. And you know it's going to be a good interview when you walk in and the guy is playing Megadeth on his guitar. So why don't we talk to Tony Kennedy? What was that song you were playing?
That was Take No Prisoners, Megadeth.
Fuck, I didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
Was it on acoustic distortion or effect?
Just had an overdrive.
Okay,
yeah. Just learning that.
I really couldn't pick it up. Weird.
Yeah. Great song. Fun to play.
The Holy Wars?
It wasn't Holy Wars. No. It's off Rust in Peace. Take No Prisoners.
Take No Prisoners.
Yeah.
Right. Holy Wars is a good song. My favorite off of Rust in Peace is Tornado of Souls because of that solo.
Yeah, Tornado is great. I mean, probably the greatest metal album ever made.
You think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, even with the early production and the sound quality, it's a bit weird with the vocals. A lot of people put Master of Puppets at number one, or maybe Black Sabbath. But for me, it's definitely Rest in Peace. It's the album I go back to over and over again, and I don't get tired of it. I try not to play it too much. And then once you start learning the songs and stuff like that, that always gives me like a different understanding of how the song is, a different appreciation. So it's fun to learn the stuff. If you can. I mean, it's pretty tough.
I tried learning guitar when I was in prison, and I just realized this is going to take me a long time to learn, and I gave up.
Yeah, the first 3 months are a drag until you get some chords and your fingers start going. Some people are naturals, and they pick it up and they can play. I had to practice.
Welcome to Pulling the Trigger. This is a good time to start as any because we're getting into it. Today our guest is Tony Kennedy. And I know Tony from a bunch of different places, actually. But when did you learn to play guitar?
I started playing when I was 16.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Did you dig right in, like immediately practicing hours a day kind of thing?
Yeah, I did. What happened was I was listening to Zeppelin 1, Good Times, Bad Times, and that solo in there that Jimmy Page plays just blew my mind. And I was always doing playing air guitar in my living room. I thought, well, might as well learn how to really play it. And so got a guitar, and I had lots of friends who were musicians. So there was basically a band waiting. I just needed to learn how to play my instrument. So I took lessons for 2 years. And I just practiced basically blues. And I'd play the same thing over and over and over again. And then just keep working away at it.
Nice. Do you play in a band now?
No. I mean, we do a barbecue here in the summer. We'll put a little barbecue band together and do a bunch of songs for that. Or if there's somewhere to jam, might do something like that. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort. But I like recording. I like recording music.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Like, are you ever a hired gun?
No, but you can hear on SoundCloud, TK Mongoose, there's about 9 tracks on there of just different stuff from different times. Like when I was a kid, when I was 16 years old, there's stuff on there. There's stuff that I've done more recently. So
TK Mongoose is the handle?
TK Mongoose, nice. SoundCloud.
Nice. So, okay. The main reason I got Tony on today is not so much his music, definitely, because we have metal in common, but you are currently, what do you do for work right now?
Well, for the past 7 years, I've been an addictions counselor for a treatment center in the downtown east side.
And when Tony and I met, you were working at a halfway house.
That's right.
That the police ended up surrounding and arresting me out of.
Yeah, I remember
you. Were you there that day?
I don't know if I was there. I remember you coming in and then leaving pretty quick. I totally remember you though. And I was at that halfway house for 10 years.
You were there for that long?
Yeah, I was there for 10 years. I was a frontline worker for 7 and then managed the facility for the last 3 years.
It was 2006 I was there.
Yeah, I left in 2010.
So you were there for 2010.
Yeah.
You'd been there for a few years?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'd been there for a long time.
All right, let's just go back a bit. What got you into this kind of work, like humanities or social work or whatever, mental health addictions? Yeah,
well, it was kind of, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I mean, it was kind of, one thing led to another. I mean, I had been running a business, Kennedy's Milk Delivery, and I did that for about 7 years. And then I kind of bottomed out in my life, sold that business, and then took a year off, then went back to school. And somebody said to me, hey, you'd be a good counselor now. I was doing lots of my own work, lots of my own therapy. And so I was in different groups. And the counselor at the time said, hey, you'd be a good counselor. And I was like, well, I don't really like people. I don't think I want to do that. And she said, well, I seen you in group and how you interact with people. And I think you got some skills there. So I hate school. Can't stand it. Right. So I went to VCC. And just dipped my feet in the water there and took their basic counseling skills and then did their certificate program. And then I got a job working in group homes and the halfway house, trying to do some stuff on the side. And then I slowly went through. I went to Langara and then I went to UBC. And then I came out and did another counseling certificate. So after a while, I did start to really like it. There were certain things that I felt I was good at it. I felt like it was like a bit of a calling and I needed to follow it. And I read this book called We're All Doing Time by Bo Lozoff. And it was basically a book where people who were in prison would write letters to him and he'd answer back. But the answers he gave were pretty much wisdom that anybody could use. Really good book. And so I wanted to work with people coming out of prison. And so that's what I did.
And how does one get a job for a halfway house? Is it in Craigslist? No, I guess they didn't have that back then though.
They didn't have it, through word of mouth. I mean, now, yeah, you can go and there'll be postings at, the various facilities looking for people. There's always work in halfway houses, and it's a pretty good job. I loved it. I mean, my area especially is basically working with adult men. I've worked with teenage girls. I've worked with, couples. I've worked with all kinds of different, people, but adult men is probably the thing that I'm the best at. So, word of mouth, I knew a guy who was running one of the first dual diagnosis programs. It was called the Stephen Kruger House, and it was out on the Riverview property. And there were some other people involved in that, in corrections, and from the university, and from John Howard Society. So I went out there and we did that, and there was about four clients, 24-hour facility. And that was the first thing, and then that shut down, and they asked me to go work somewhere else. And I went and worked somewhere else with them. And I think we were making about $10 an hour. It was like 1998 or something like that, 99. I mean, I started there in 2000. To me, it was 2000, so it was pretty low pay. So I did that, and then I liked it.
Huh. Then you got into the working in the halfway house. And what would you say the biggest challenge of working in a halfway house is? It sounds like a hack question or a stock question, but a lot of people wouldn't even really know what a halfway house is, right?
Yeah, halfway house is a place for federal offenders coming out of the institutions. Anybody who's done more than 2 years, and they need somewhere to go. They can't stay in jail. They're not, bad enough to stay in jail, and they're not healthy enough to be out in the community on their own. So there's some restrictions. And it's a nice transition, especially for somebody who's been in for a long time. So what was the question?
What would you say a challenge?
Oh, the challenge.
Yeah.
Well, the bureaucracy and the politics of the correction system. It's very hard to actually do any real good work and build relationships with people because the system is just so complicated and cumbersome, and things just don't make sense to the people that are released, some of the people that are kept in. It's all about managing risk, and it's all about, box checking. So it becomes hard to kind of do what you want to do without sort of being blocked in some way. And they don't take the addictions thing very seriously. They don't really do a whole lot to address the addiction issue, which most of the guys are in there for.
No, I remember the first halfway house I got out to before I met you. So we met in Guy Richmond, and the one I was in before that was directly next door to a crack house.
Yeah.
Right. So, and they just told us when you get there, hey, don't talk to those guys over there. And it's like, what the fuck? What if they talk like, and I'd been locked up for a long time too, right? Like, who am I going to talk to then?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, stuff like that. And, just putting a bunch of people in a place. Our place was pretty good because it was 18 beds. So it was relatively small for a halfway house. And then when that job wound up, I figured, okay, well, I got the skills as a counselor. I got the experience in addiction recovery. I knew some people down at this treatment center, and I thought, okay, see if they have some work for me, and they did.
What kind of work do you do at the treatment center?
So my group has 12 people in it.
So group therapy.
It's all group therapy, some individual. It's a pretty structured plan with a lot of activities throughout the day and a lot of treatment. It's 12-step based. So guys are supposed to go to meetings and participate in 12-step community, and then we do some therapy and group therapy. And the heart of the whole program is this lifeline where people basically write down everything that happened to them throughout their whole life. And then they share it with the group. And then we process it, give them feedback. So it's a cathartic thing. It's a way to recovery now is really about getting honest with yourself and getting to the truth. Who am I really? What is it that, what is it that I'm made of? And sometimes people just can't see it. So they need somebody to, hold a mirror up to them or shine a light on some of those parts they haven't looked at for a long time.
It's interesting. A lot of people probably wouldn't know that there's a drug treatment center on the downtown east side. Does that make it difficult for clients to get clean?
Yeah, it does. And it makes it difficult for services to refer people because going down there, their old stomping ground, there's drugs everywhere.
They don't even get to the front door.
They don't get to the front door and they're gone, yeah.
You get a lot of guys there who, as soon as they get any money in their hand, they leave?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, even just like welfare day or whatever it is. Yeah, they get some money. Some people just can't handle the money in the area, the temptation, and it's depressing. It's like the downtown east side is depressing. I mean, and working down there, I mean, I had been doing that for 15 years, been doing, working with guys coming out of prison and in the recovery community. I had never seen anything like the downtown east side with the kind of clients that I was working with. Like, I hadn't heard about any of these kind of bottoms. The bottoms that I heard when I went down there were just shocking. And it hasn't stopped the whole time. I'm shocked every day.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I'm in 12-step program. You're open about your recovery. Tony and I are both in 12-step recovery. We bump into each other in a bunch of different arenas in life, right? Mm. And one of the things that I don't totally agree with, I get what they're saying when they say this, but I know it's not the whole picture. It's like all addicts and alcoholics are the same. Mm. And I'm like, no, that's not totally true. Mm. What would you say the difference between someone who's like one of your clients, someone who's coming from the downtown east side, and the typical run-of-the-mill alcoholic who, is, drinking too much in the bar and what would you say the biggest differences are?
The biggest difference is that the person who drinks in the bar has probably had some successes in their life. They got their driver's license. They graduated from school. They may not be dealing with a serious mental illness. They got their teeth. They don't have Hep C.
They might even be married.
They might even be married. They might have some success in their life at some point. With the clients that I work out, if they've had any success, it's been short-lived. And it usually looks like some kind of job that they had for a couple of years where they made some money and bought a few things, but then they lost it all. So people who have had success in their life and sort of met some of those benchmarks we have for what we look for as success, they tend to do better than a guy who's never really had any success and who's just been skidding along the bottom. Basically they went from group home to jail to the streets to a treatment center. You can't fix that person in 90 days or even a year. You're talking about moving somebody from the street to the sidewalk.
Wow. So I guess when you get, just to give it a composite, not to talk about clients individually, but you probably there's enough similarities that you can probably give a profile. It's like when you get a client, especially someone who's coming from a place like you're talking about, what goal do you have when you're trying to help them get their life together? Like it's probably like with certain levels of addiction, the goals are going to be different than the types of clients you're talking about. So.
Well, I set the bar pretty high. I mean, I'm looking for long-term abstinence. I want to see people do better than just going on welfare and living in transitional housing and then just circulating around the treatment centers and the shelters for the next 10 or 15 years. In a lot of ways, success does look like that. Just a person, coming in and out of detoxes and relapsing and all this kind of stuff. But I don't see that. I'd like to set the bar a little higher than that. So what we start with is basically the relationship with the client, and I use that as the vehicle for change. So everything is therapy, all the interactions, all the problem solving, all the ways that we do things throughout the day. Those are, learning opportunities or chances for us to practice skills, right? And does the person, blow up and get mad? Do they storm off in a huff? Do they try and charm me and be sweet? What are their skills? What are their coping strategies? So look at that. I also believe just one day at a time sobriety. Let's just get through today. Let's not worry too much about, 5 years from now or 6 months from now. Let's just focus on getting through this day clean and sober. I think that's important. And then the health stuff. I'm big on the health. You got to go to the dentist. You got to see the doctor. I mean, we had our stats come out recently and almost every client goes to see the doctor. I forgot how many visits there were. It was something like 1,200 visits and we had 170 clients come through. So that means like each client is seeing a doctor, I don't know, 4 times, 5 times while they're there.
Just while they're in the treatment center.
So some client, some may not see a doctor at all. Others will see a doctor 10 times. Yeah. So medical stuff, medications, all the health problems that come along with that kind of lifestyle. Just living hard. Because guys roll in their 40s and 50s. And they're just beaten right down. And they've been using drugs to sort of feel good. And once those drugs are gone, then all the aches and pains and all the problems just roll right back.
Wow. Yeah, I remember when I came into recovery, and I'd go to I went to the fellowship that has more of the alcohol people than the drug people, and I remember I'd never really been around people like that before. Like, they'd tell their stories in the meetings, and I'd be like, you still had a fucking job? What the fuck? Right? Like, and then my wife, I'm like, you had a wife?
Yeah.
You had a fridge with food? Like, they'd been arrested, but they'd never really done time. Like, the culture shock for me was I didn't even know you could be an addict and not live like I did.
Yeah.
Right? It was so weird. And it was tough. The toughest part for me, integrating back into society, rehabilitating, recovering, whatever term you want to use, was the steps I had to take were so, like, I had to learn stuff that most people learn when they're like 13 years old. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of embarrassing. That was the shit that was hard. It was humiliating a lot of the time, right? And did you experience that with any of your clients?
Yeah, it's reparenting. I mean, you're basically, there's this idea that a person stops developing at the age that they started using drugs. So you're dealing with a 12-year-old, they're a teenager here. And yeah, they don't know how to cope with stuff, but they think they do. So
we never want to admit we don't know. Being thought of as stupid is the biggest stumbling block I had. I don't want you to think I'm stupid.
Right. So there's kind of like this mask that people wear and they go around, I'm okay, everything's okay. But it's ridiculous. You're in a treatment center. You have no friends. You have no money. You have nowhere to live. You lost everything.
You could put a gun to my head and I couldn't make a resume.
Yeah. Yeah. They just can't. No computer skills. Nowadays, computers is vital. And there's people that they don't know how to operate a computer, but they just want to push through. So, going back to that, what was the question that you asked us for that? The meetings, and the difference between the bottoms.
The demographics,
yeah. And so most of the clients that I work with, they go to those meetings and say that person doesn't have a problem. That is not an alcohol problem. Like, they still think, smoking weed. Most of the people are using heroin and crystal meth or fentanyl and meth. That's all that's around, and that's what they're using.
A lot of our guests have talked about that these days. It's
not much alcohol. Very rare to find a pure alcoholic who just drinks booze. I have seen them in the facility, but not too much in the community anymore. In the facility, we see some real alcoholics that come through who just drink booze. But most people, it's fentanyl and meth.
Right, wow.
And that's when they come in. They don't come in until everything's gone.
When I was using, it was crack and heroin was the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got clean just as oxy and meth were becoming popular. So last street drug I ever did in my life was meth, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was on methadone at the time. Mm. And the methadone, oddly enough, hey man, I'm an abstinence guy, but I will say something. Methadone helped bridge the gap from street drugs to abstinence for me.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of controversy. That's another reason I wanted to have you on is because you work in the field now.
Yeah.
A lot of my listeners are average people. They're just they don't know much about anything. And so when you tell them about when I tell them, or when anyone tells them about rehab, they think, okay, so you go to rehab and you learn to get clean. And I say, it's not really like that necessarily. It's called, now the focus is harm reduction.
Right. Yeah.
Were you around when that transition happened?
Yeah, I would say, I want to come back to the idea of tapering off methadone.
Sure.
And how you did that, because that is...
I did it against doctor's advice, first things first.
Yeah, let's focus on that for a second. So how did you do that?
So, okay, I was in prison at the time, and I was on methadone. And
how much methadone?
40 mils.
40 mils.
Started at 30, never got higher than 40.
Okay.
And in order to get a transfer to the only institution in British Columbia that does not have the methadone program, because they don't have a full-time medical staff there. Mm. In order to get transferred there, I had to be off methadone. But what ended up happening was that the institution, along with the doctor, wanted to taper me down really slow. Like, it would have been 6-9 months. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, I'm not doing it that slow. Because once I got down to 20 mils, I started feeling sick.
Yeah.
And I'm like, in my mind, I thought, I'm already feeling sick. Why fucking prolong this, right? Mm-hmm. So then over a period of it was 1 week. When I'd go and get it, I'd leave a little bit in the bottle. And every day I'd leave a little bit more in the bottle. And then on the last day, I just took a thimbleful. Mm-hmm. My last party was a thimbleful of methadone.
Right.
And then the next day I just didn't go up and get it.
So you just took what they gave you and did your own taper.
Yeah. And then last day, like I said, I just never went up again, and I've been clean and sober ever since.
Yeah. And was the sickness bad?
It was bad. But one thing that I find, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. I don't give a shit though. I find junkies fucking exaggerate how bad the sickness is sometimes. Like we've all been dope sick a million times, right? And I can't be sick. It's like, it's not fun. It's not pleasant. But when you really are tired of it, the dope sick's actually the easy part. It's once the withdrawal's done and you have to change your life and like reestablish and new neural pathways, new habits, new behaviors, new values. That's the fucking hard part. My buddy in the joint used to say, you can kick a million junk habits. The problem's in your head though. Right. But I once I was kicked at, because that was after I robbed the bank and got taken out of the halfway house that you worked at. I'd been clean. Like, I was only using when I was at that halfway house for a very short period of time. I was trying to stay clean, and then I fucked it up, right? And once I got clean again and I was off the methadone, I'm like, okay, no, let's try this again. And then I went to a treatment center. I ended up getting a parole to a treatment center, and it just, one thing led to another, and I wanted to stay clean. The life I saw available to me seemed better than... It wasn't right there. Like, there was still a lot of work I had to do, but I could see it for once.
Yeah.
When I was out at that halfway house with you, I didn't see it.
You didn't see the positive life that was available.
I felt I was a fucking freak and I'm never going to fit in out here. It's always good. Like, because I felt like I couldn't tell people about my life, and I felt like I'm always going to have to lie or make something up or something like that. And I just went, fuck it. I can't do this. Yeah.
So the methadone taper, now, what we saw, or what I saw, what I've experienced with that shift, I mean, first we saw, heroin used to be really hard to get. I mean, in the 80s and that, it wasn't really... It
was very expensive.
Very expensive, hard to get. And then I think about 92, 94, all of a sudden heroin started to be easier to get, and cocaine dropped in price significantly. So all the weed dealers turned into coke dealers, and then the coke dealers turned into heroin dealers. And that ran until about, 2000, maybe 2005. And then since then, it's just been meth and fentanyl. And people still refer to it as heroin.
They call it down or something, right? But it's all
not, it's not heroin. And the crack, they still call it crack, but it's meth. And even the meth is now poor quality, is what I'm hearing, is people say you can't even get high on it anymore, right?
It's fucked.
So people come in and they want to, there's a lot of methadone, a lot of Suboxone. I'm sure they're going to come out with some sort of cocaine replacement therapy. There's a lot of people who are going to be using marijuana. So abstinence is, it's hard to define now, what that is. And harm reduction. I mean, some would argue that even abstinence-based programs like AA and that are, harm reduction, because, you're trying to reduce the harm with alcohol, but then there's people who are still acting out in other addictions. It's
gambling, sex,
gambling, sex, spending money, food. So
I struggle with some of that.
Yeah.
Not the gambling part. I've never liked gambling because it seems like a waste of money. But But other shit, I have to, as someone who struggles with addiction, the core issue being addiction, I got to watch out. I got to watch for anything that makes me feel a bit better. Anything that makes me feel a bit better, I've got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for me, it's anything that's like an escape that takes me away from the problems. And I mean, I've gambled a few times, and I know that I would become an addict just by the adrenaline rush that I feel when the money gets taken away. It's just an incredible, it just feels like this weight is getting dropped on me. And when I win, I go up and I just have to walk away because I know, hey, that I've become a gambling addict. Now, food I'm fine with. I mean, it's not a huge problem, but it just doesn't work the same way. Like, I'd have to eat a whole thing of pizza, like a whole large pizza and a 2-liter bottle of Coke to sort of numb out. And it's just, I don't think I could do that really.
How long have you been sober for?
23 years.
Oh, wow. Fuck, long time. How old were you when you got sober?
27.
Oh, wow. So are you sober longer than you were drinking for?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
I was drinking from 12 to 27. Mostly, like in the beginning, it was as more drugs, right? Like weed, acid, mushrooms. Then later on, 16, 17, started to have access to alcohol a little bit more. And at 21, just full-blown alky. It was amazing how fast that just took over. I mean, I just became dependent on alcohol.
Like needed it in the morning and stuff? Or
Yeah, well, in the morning, I like to drink in the morning. It was just enjoyable. I mean, every night's Friday night for me, and I just, why play these games? Oh, I'm not going to drink in the morning. Like, hey, it's a time for a drink, you know. And the same with the cocaine, that really got away too, and the price came down, and everybody was doing it, and you know, once you start doing drugs, you do enough for long enough, you just become dependent on it. And then when it was time to try and get out, I couldn't get out. I was like painting myself into a corner, and it's a scary place to be. Plus, I think the whole drug thing, for me, it was like, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's like this glamorous lifestyle. You got this money, and I was working, I was running the business, but it's a total joke. It's a ripoff. You're sitting there, you feel lonely, it's depressing, you're not getting high anymore. It's just not any fun, and you have to do it. The party's over, and you have to keep going and getting more drugs and getting more booze, and it's just tiring. It's so much work. So the thought of going on like that for another 40 years was not pleasant, and I wasn't going to die. I mean, dying, you know, seemed more appealing than going on for another 40 years as an alcoholic. Being a drug addict, active drug addict, that's a tough life. That's a tough life. So, you know, and I've always looked at myself as a bit of a radical, a bit of a rebel. And I thought the most radical thing was just to tap out and say, you know what, I'm done. I'm out. And it was freaked a lot of people out. You know, a lot of my friends didn't think, you know, they were always asking, hey, are you still not drinking? And you know, it took years before people said, oh, okay, I get, you know, they get it, right? At first they thought it was just a sort of phase I was going through.
Still friends with anyone from back then?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I got three of my best friends. I still hang out with maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And, you know, a lot of those other people that I grew up with, you know, some of them are dead and due to drugs, and some of them have gotten sober. And I got 3 good friends, and they all drink. So that's the way that is. Yeah.
Yeah. I know one guy who I was in prison with, and I talked to him. He's out now again, and we talk once in a while. But other than that, everyone I know from when I was using drugs and all that kind of stuff, either dead or locked up. Mostly dead.
Yeah. I just heard the stat. It was 1,700 people died in 2017 of overdoses. That's what they're saying.
In BC?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
So, I mean, that was the other thing with the treatment center. I mean, a lot of our clients and stuff like that, they're dead now. I mean, that fentanyl wiped out everybody.
In 18 months, so it's like 2016, end of 2015, beginning of 2016, up until about now, I've known at least 60. It's probably up at 70 now. I stopped counting at 30. Yeah. But on the rough, just going through my head, I can tell it's about 60.
Yeah.
When I was in active addiction, I didn't even know that many people who died.
No. I mean, it's
few a year would die when I was doing my thing.
Yeah, it's madness. I mean, the ambulance, like the sirens on down there all day long. The day before, welfare check, and all during the day, and a little bit the day after. The fire engine, they don't even turn their engine off when they come back to the fire station. They're just because they're going to go out again. So it seems like it's been quieter lately. But I don't know. And I talk to, you know, my clients who have apartments, you know, they have those SROs and stuff in the area, and they go back and nobody's there. And so, where, you know, they ask the manager, where's so-and-so, where's so-and-so? Everybody's dead.
Fuck.
So I don't know. It's pretty wild times.
So back when I was a kid, so 15, I was a hardcore drug addict up until I was 26. Back then, and I'd go to treatment centers sometimes, but it was always just to get out of jail. Then I'd leave, right? But back then, it was all abstinence-based. Mm-hmm. There was no harm reduction. I would have said, what's that? I would have never heard of it. It would have been a joke at the time, right? There was methadone, but even back then, if you were on methadone and you wanted to go to a treatment center, the goal was to get people off of methadone.
Yeah.
When did the transition from abstinence-based recovery to harm reduction-based recovery, or whatever the term for it is now, when did that take place?
I would say 2005, like at that same point. It just, everybody started getting on methadone. And they just, like, it used to be you would have had to exhaust all other avenues of recovery to get on methadone. You would have had to go to treatment. You would have had to have been an older person. You would have had to have been a long-term heroin user before they would do it. Then everybody was just being thrown on, and it just became another drug in the mix. So people would use methadone, top it up with a little bit of crack or whatever, maybe.
Everyone I know who was on methadone would do coke on top of it or something else. No one I knew who was on the methadone program went, okay, now I'm on methadone, I don't need anything else.
Yeah.
Not a single person.
Yeah, so it just became another drug. And so when people heard that, then everybody wanted to get on it, and the doctors were just writing prescriptions for everybody, and the pharmacies were doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I don't know how many people are on methadone now, or methadose. They've changed the
it's a stronger version of it now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's supposedly harder to tamper with. And Suboxone. So I would say in our treatment center we have 30% of the clients. We have 60 clients. 20 of them are on opiate replacement therapy. That's what they call it.
Now they have Suboxone too.
They got Suboxone, and it's definitely not the magic pill that everyone sort of had hoped it would be.
It's still touted like it is, though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's harder to tamper with. It's got the naloxone in it, so it's harder to, use other drugs. I heard you could use fentanyl with it, or maybe you wouldn't. Yeah, I don't think so, but people are doing stuff. If you stop taking it one day, the next day you could get high. As soon as you start feeling sick, you could get high. So these guys, they're drug addicts, so they're going to find a way. I mean, they're going to find a way to figure something out.
It's always funny. As a drug addict, I'd spend so much time figuring out these harebrained schemes to get high, like that, like what you just, something like that. Or like in the joint, we'd drink people's regurgitated methadone and stuff like that. But never that amount of energy to get a job.
No.
Or anything, or find housing.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. It's like brilliant Einstein levels of genius to get high.
Sure.
But I don't know how to fill out a resume.
Yeah. It's incredible the amount of energy that goes into, guys even going looking for cans all day long and coming back for, a $10 paper or something. Lots of, and that's what's so unusual is some of these folks, they're able to, gather these resources to do certain things, but not to improve the quality of life. So when the methadone and the Suboxone came in, the reason the treatment centers were against it was because it's hard to do good therapeutic work with somebody who's nodding off or over-medicated, because the medical community is not interested in how a person functions. They just want to be able to reduce the cravings for opiates. So the guys would come in and they just nod off in the group. But the political pressure and that to take people, and who's your funder? If you're being funded by the government, you can't say no to somebody's medical treatment. So, everybody tried to resist. There was a lot of resistance because it's not fair to the guy who is abstinent, who isn't using an opiate replacement, to be sitting next to somebody who's nodding off. And it's not good for his recovery. It could be triggering, and it doesn't work. But that's where we're at now.
One of the arguments, because I kind of have my tentacles in all kinds of different communities, right? So I'm in the recovery abstinence-based community, and I'm also in the harm reduction community with this. I know lots of people, and I've helped lots of people who work in the safe injection sites, the pop-ups. And so the people in abstinence tend to not like the harm reduction, and the harm reduction tend to not like the abstinence-based. There tends to be a fight amongst them all the time. And so the abstinence-based people, and I can see they're both have points, valid points, and they're both wrong, in my opinion, on a lot of things too, right? Wrong is maybe not the right word, but maybe, I can see pros to both and I can see cons to both. So the abstinence-based people say, you're just enabling them. That's not real recovery. Why offer people these kinds of things? It's never going to give them an incentive to get better. Let them hit bottom. The harm reduction people say, everyone's different. Not everyone responds to the same form of or modality of treatment. Some people will never be able to achieve abstinence, and to try and place that expectation on them actually does them more harm than good. It doesn't. They say 12-step can actually be traumatizing or trigger trauma because the amateurs are trying to administer therapy. Sometimes it can be cult-like. All these things, right? Yeah. And it's like both sides. And it's like, yeah, you're kind of right on all, but it's not the whole story. I find on both sides, there's a lot of animosity. Do you find that in your work?
Yeah, and like you say, both sides have good points. Like those points that you just made now are all valid, right? Like the people who are, I would be more in the abstinence category, but I do think there are some people that harm reduction is where you got to look at, well, what harm is being reduced, right? And is it that person who's been a long-term drug addict, has tried everything and been everywhere, and this, they can't do it, and they're going to probably be on methadone. So methadone most of the time is a life sentence. You're going to be taking that for the rest of your life. Very hard to taper. Not many people I've seen have success. They usually relapse and go back.
Most people, yeah, they get down to close to the end, and then they tap out and say, I can't do it.
Yeah. So I think there is a place for that, but maybe it might be an easier, softer way a little too early. And I'd like to see people try a little harder. But because of fentanyl and people dying, now when you go to detox, you leave with a script for Suboxone. You leave with a script. I don't think they do the methadone. You need a script when you go in there. But everybody in the past year, when they leave detox, they're put on Suboxone. Now, the problem is, like what you said before, is a lot of these treatment centers still won't take people who are on an opiate replacement therapy.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's nowhere for these people to go to get treatment anyway.
Right.
So it's a bit of a battle, and our place is one of the few places that will take people on opiate replacement, and so it becomes the dumping ground. And that's where all the people who are on opiate replacement that nobody else will take will go.
Right. And some of these people probably aren't even necessarily down for the treatment you're offering.
No.
I would imagine. They're like, no, I'm just here need somewhere to stay. I've got my treatment, take the pill, and that's the end. I don't want to do your group, really.
Yeah.
But they probably have to as a condition to stay there, right?
Exactly. They'll put up with the therapy in order to get some housing and for their medication, their other health issues. So, and sometimes you can bring people in, they get, caught up on it, because recovery can be a great thing. It can be a lot of fun.
It can be just being around it can be quite inspiring. So, like, I hate the meetings that we go to sometimes, but every once in a while I'll leave one because someone said something and I'll be like, fuck, that was amazing what that person said. I'd never hear that anywhere else. Yeah. Like, where else would I hear something like that, right? That resonated with me so much.
Yeah, it's a great experience to go to these meetings and be able to listen. I think it teaches people really good listening skills because you have somebody up there who's going to talk and share and tell their story, and you're not going to interrupt them. So some people don't like to listen to those stories. Other people find it, enjoyable or inspiring.
One of the things that a lot of people these days, because I get asked all the time because I'm so open. I wouldn't say I'm a public figure, but I have a fairly large social media presence. I'm very open about my stuff. I make jokes about it and stuff, right? I'll get messages all the time, probably on average at least one a month. Hey, I think I have a problem. Do you think you could give me a hand? And I go, okay, well, here's what I did. And as soon as I say 12-step abstinence, breaks. They're like, no. I'm like, and these reasons are usually the God thing, and they don't want to be abstinent off of everything.
Yeah.
Usually they have a problem with one thing. Usually it's Coke these days.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's booze, but they still want to be able to either smoke weed or drink, depending on what they're doing. And I have to tell them, because I'm not a counselor, I just say, I don't know that there's other services available, but I can't really speak to them because that's not what I did, right? Yeah. And I tell them, I went to a rehab center, right? That's what I did. And they're like, well, I don't want to disrupt my life. I'm like, I did, that's not what I did, so I don't know what to tell you, right? Mm-hmm. But the reason I bring that up is it seems like abstinence-based recovery is not cool anymore. It's vilified, in fact, is what I notice.
I would agree. I think it's a voice that's gotten very quiet. Mm-hmm. So you got to remember, there used to be the whole treatment community used to be 12-steppers, and all the treatment centers were run by those
recovering addicts.
People who were in recovery, recovering addicts. And then again, around that same time, it might have even been earlier than 2000.
It was when Insight, I think, started becoming.
Was it an Insight?
It's sort of around then because it was a different. I got out after Insight was open, but I remember seeing who was like in the joint. The people who were doing the drug and alcohol programs all of a sudden weren't addicts anymore. They were just quote unquote regular people who'd gotten degree
Right.
in counseling, whatever, right?
So, and what they teach in school is not 12-step. It's not that, format. So they're looking at cognitive behavioral, they're looking at, psychosocial model, they're looking at narrative therapy, they're looking at these other ways, which is great stuff. It's all great stuff. But it just changes the message because now it's not about the abstinence so much. It's more about like the therapy and working on these issues that are underlying and hoping that somehow is going to allow the person to not want to do drugs anymore, that they can manage their thoughts better or come up with some way of challenging their thoughts. And that works with a certain population, like the one you were talking about who goes to the AA meetings who doesn't have a low bottom. But the low bottom guys who are in jail, I don't know if it does them that much good. I mean, we're really in an experimental phase in terms of treatment. We had for a long time it was abstinence-based, 12-step was the only thing. Now there's more harm reduction, there's more therapeutic models. The 12-step community in the treatment centers has gotten quiet. Although out of the 1,200 beds that are available, that's including Chilliwack and everything, almost all those treatment centers say you need to go to 3 or 4 12-step meetings a week.
So even if their core program isn't 12-step based.
Even if their core program isn't 12 steps, everybody wants their clients to go into that community.
Well, the thing I always tell people about 12-step meetings is that yeah, you're going to hear some wacky, stupid shit, and some of it's fucking ridiculous, right? But most of it's not really going to hurt you, for the most part. Like, going and hanging out with people, like if you're trying to stay clean off of drugs, going and hanging around a group of people who are also clean and staying off of drugs, it's
not
something to do, right?
Yeah, I agree with the sort of some of the cult-like features of this, this certain language and way to speak and people coming together and holding hands. But it's been around for a while. It's going to stay around. It doesn't cost anything. It's there every day of the week. So I feel like the guys who aren't involved in that community, it's just a bit of a more lonely, isolated way to go. And we know that addiction is a disease of isolation. So it's going to be hard to stay sober. Even with all the help of counselors, therapy, and treatment centers, it's hard to stay sober. So I don't know how somebody's going to do it without.
Yeah, just get out alone.
Yeah, they're just like, oh, I'm just not going to do drugs anymore. Everything's good. It's like you say, they need that reparenting or that learning that's going to teach them how to be a productive member of society. And they can get that in a 12-step program. I think the thing that stops people from doing it, and the people that want, when they send you a message, they don't want to do any work. Recovery's hard work. It's a lot of work. And it takes time and it's slow and it feels like, oh, this isn't, paying off right away. And it takes time. And all your problems don't go away just because you're not doing drugs anymore. It's like life still in session and you got to keep going. And again, that's why it's important to have support either through a therapist or other kinds of supports because it's tough work, man.
I would say the thing that benefited me most for going to 12-step groups, more than even the 12-step part, was just having community and support and not being alone and people to help me with those basic life skills that I didn't know. Like my sponsor, when he first found me, grabbed me at a meeting because he'd seen me he was at this party thing that we were at and he watched me and I couldn't interact with people. Typical guy from the joint. They'd all be sitting in the living room and I'd be off in the corner fucking with my back up against the wall because I can't talk to them. And he caught me doing that. He didn't say anything because he didn't want to embarrass me. But he found me at a meeting where I was at a meeting and he grabbed me and he just said, I watched you and you're going to need help with that. Because if you don't, basically, I'm paraphrasing, he said, if you don't figure this out, you're fucked. Right. And I was, what do you, again, the pride. No, I know what I'm doing. I've done a set of steps. I read da-da-da-da-da. And then a few years later, I realized, man, that guy saved my life because I would have he said, what he told me is eventually you're going to start getting frustrated because you're going to have problems.
Right.
And he was absolutely right.
And that's why people sometimes give up too because they don't get this, great life right away.
I wasn't a VP. Yeah. I didn't have a car and a hot girlfriend. So why the fuck am I even doing this? Right.
Yeah. After 2 years, that's people they drop out because they're like, okay, I might as well be off using now. The thing about that, like the other big shift is that the treatment and therapy is much more collaborative now. It's much more client focused. So it's basically the client saying, well, this is what I want to do. And then the therapist and counselor helping them along with that plan. Whereas before it was like that guy came up to you in that room and they would be much more direct, much more in your face and say, this is your problem. And if you don't change this, you're not going to make it. And I think that whole kind of direct talk is not favorable now. Like you say, even abstinence is not, it's a bit of a dirty word, but the meetings are full and it seems like
people are still coming in.
It's thriving. So, I don't know. And there are these two factions that do seem to be battling it out. And I don't know what will happen. I don't know if they'll come out. I mean, I think that the moves now are going to be more medication, naltrexone and baclofen for reducing cravings. I think this is helping with reducing cravings for alcohol and maybe meth. And so working with brain chemistry, trying to figure that stuff out would probably be the next area because there has to be money. And I think that's one of the reasons that 12-step stuff just hasn't, I guess it is the predominant model, but a lot of people are against it because there's no money in it. There's no money. You can't make a treatment center.
Especially when you get out of the treatment center, you go to these meetings that are self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. Let's pick on the pharmaceutical companies just for a second. How do they make money off of that?
Yeah.
They don't.
They're like, why would we want to support that?
Now, why are we going to do research into something if, because let's face it, an addict who has to take a medication that's prescribed, that's an annuity package, really, right? Like you could, especially something that, like you said, methadone.
Yeah, it's for life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You bring up something you said, and I want to make sure we touch on it, is what is addiction? Because you said disease a minute ago, but a lot of people say that's not accurate anymore either. What is it?
Yeah, you got your different definitions. I mean, that we've heard is basically, behavior that continues in spite of negative consequences. That seems to be the
consensus
on what an addiction is. Then you got the physical symptoms. Anytime there's going to be some kind of physical withdrawal, the person is addicted to that. But we throw the word around for everything now. I'm addicted to TV. I'm addicted to food or whatever it is. And so it's hard to definitely, and I mean, Ross Laird, he talks about it being as something that blocks you from yourself. Anything that takes you out of yourself is an addiction. Now, disease model as opposed to choice model, I think there's some evidence, and certainly it looks like a disease to me in terms of the way that people behave. Like, I don't think anybody would make that choice to be flailing around on the street day after day, year after year. But I think most people, it is the choice model. So for most people, like the high-end bottoms, the higher bottoms, they can decide because they've had success. They can make a choice. They have the willpower to stop. But then there's some other people, and it's a very small group of people that seem to not stop no matter what. And over and over and over again, they try all sorts of things, and they keep returning to drug use. And they've done a lot of good work. I mean, the toughest client is the guy that's been to every treatment center and done every group and been everywhere and knows all the information inside and out, but can't stop using.
Can't actually incorporate it into his life or whatever.
It's just there's no holes. I mean, they may even doing a pretty good program. They may be actually, doing pretty well, but for some reason they return to. And I mean, drugs in one aspect. I mean, in the beginning they're awesome, so you remember how amazing it is. In the beginning when you're doing drugs, and so it's hard to forget that. You're always chasing that first sort of excitement of that experience. So is that the disease? I'm not sure, but I think there's some genetic components to it. I think, if you come from a family of alcoholics and drug addicts, you're at risk. You're not guaranteed. Like, my sister's not an alcoholic. But everybody going back in my family, there was alcoholism throughout. So it was like I was kind of doomed right from the beginning.
I notice in my family tree on both sides, there is mental illness.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's something in there, that nature-nurture argument.
What causes addiction? Do they know yet? Is there a theory, a working theory?
You mean like a gene or
well, because it used to be. So back when I first started hearing about addiction, they just said it was a disease,
right?
And now I know that a lot of the medical community says it's not a disease like you normally would think of a disease.
Yeah.
And some people say it's just a choice.
Yeah.
And some people say there is a genetic component totally, and then other people say no, it's neither. Do you know what causes it?
Well, I mean, some people would say it is, trauma, right? Early onset of trauma, something that happened, continuously happened. There was no support. And there's this like low-lying vibration that the person needs to quiet down, and drugs seem to do that. It creates that soothing, that nurturing that they might not have got or were, abused. So it's another escape. So that was always in there too. People kind of looked at that. It was like if you were an addict, they would say, well, what happened to you? And that's why we do the lifeline. It's kind of to see. I mean, and you can really see like in some of these people's lives, like, well, no wonder they're doing drugs. I mean, it makes perfect sense that they find something that makes them feel good, makes them feel warm, makes them feel like they're in a little cocoon. They're going to go that way if the world is a tough place to live. So what causes addiction? I don't know. I'd say combination of, genetics and environment and availability.
The new theory I heard, and I know it's still just a theory, is our reward system gets hijacked.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But again, that's just a theory too. That's not necessarily they're pinpointed. We found what causes it, right? So
yeah, and like you say, there might be all these different groups of people. And so even if you look at the different groups, how many different groups would there be? Maybe 10, maybe 6. It's hard not to sort of classify people into different groups. But the one thing I can tell you, it's very hard to know who's going to be successful and who's not. It's very difficult to tell who's going to be able to stay clean and sober. What
would you say if you're just off of your own estimates from the clients who enter the place you work at? What are the success rates? And for the sake of the question, we'll define success as they're able to stay clean for a while after leaving.
Yeah. Last year, our stats just came out, and last year was a really good year. We had, I think it was almost 49% of the people who came into phase 1 completed the 90-day program. So that's one way to measure success, being abstinent for 90 days or clean or
It's almost half, too.
Yeah. The year before that, it was lower, like around 26, 27. We might have been drawing from a bigger pool the year before. So I think if you get 25% out of any group, that's good. So your question was how many people, what's the percentage of people who stay clean for like a year or 2 years?
Yeah, I don't want to say 5 years because it's hard to even measure that. Because I know a lot of the centers don't follow people that long. But let's say a year. Just
a year, I'd say the 25%.
That's pretty good.
It might go down to 20. Yeah.
That's higher than I thought it would have been.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say like 10% or something.
Yeah, it's higher than most people think. We hear this number, 5%, 3% getting thrown around. And I mean, I'm including everybody in there on methadone and that. And I would consider that a type of recovery for sure. It's a success. Valid recovery. Yeah. And if that's what that particular individual is using as support, then I support that. It's more the 3 to 5 years that's the real test, and then it might go down to 5 or 6. But sometimes when people relapse and they've had a good chunk of recovery, then they'll come back quicker. They won't stay out in the addiction as long, come back and get that clean time again and get another. So then you're looking at somebody who in 10 years, they were clean.
Most of it.
9 years. Yeah. So that's pretty great.
I know people who've been, you know them too, they've been around as long as we have in recovery or even longer. And they don't have consecutive abstinence. Like they haven't been abstinent the entire time I've been around, but they only go out like once every 6 months for a weekend or something like that. And it doesn't they don't start robbing people or they're not homeless, right? They might spend all their paycheck and then they go, oh shit.
Yeah.
And then they go back.
Yeah.
That's better than where they came from a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Right? That's not a bad life. All things considered, I know quote unquote normal people who have worse lives than that.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
Well,
all right.
Well, I don't know. Got a couple minutes before it's an even hour.
Mm-hmm.
What's life like outside of work?
Life, it's pretty good right now. getting through the Christmas, that was pretty wild. I'm doing all right. Involved in my kids' baseball. I mean, one of the things I think is really important is for men to take care of their kids, and look after their kids, and that would be another. If we were to look at who's in jail and who's in the treatment centers, I would say a lot of what the cause is just this father wound, this huge father wound that so many men seem to have. So I try and, walk the walk and be a good dad and take care of my kids and do lots of stuff with them, go out and play baseball, just going and seeing shows and hanging out with friends. I love the recovery stuff. I like going to the comedy. I mean, what's happening with the comedy for you?
I do it a lot.
Yeah?
5-10 times a week. I get paid once in a while too. It's not bad.
Wow.
Just, plugging away. Comedy takes a long time. Similar to recovery that way. It's like before you can actually say, okay, I think we're okay.
Yeah.
It takes 5-10 years.
Are there any comedians that you're watching out for? You think that other than yourself, that are on the way up?
There's a few, yeah.
There's some good
there's a few local here in this town. Yeah. Vancouver actually is world renowned for producing pound for pound some of the best comedians.
Yeah.
They don't stay here. Some do, but a lot of comedians, they're not necessarily household names, but if you're into comedy at all, they're kind of well known. They started in Vancouver.
And they go on.
It has something to do with the way the audiences are here.
I would think this is a tough audience.
Because they're tougher, it makes you a better comic.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, they're pretty reserved. Like, even if they like you and they think you're funny, it's like...
They don't necessarily laugh.
Laugh.
And Vancouver has this reputation for being super politically correct, which isn't entirely untrue, but it's not as true as people say. The hardest part is getting them to give a reaction. Because it's all based on the reaction, right? So even if they found it's funny, but they don't laugh... You don't know if the joke's good or not, right?
Right, because you're not getting much of a reaction.
So then you have to try it just that much harder to evoke a reaction from them, and it'll make you that much better of a comic.
So do you think the audiences are becoming more accepting of kind of like more radical comedy, or more like you were saying, there's certain people that just like extreme comedy. They don't want the straight kind of traditional comedy. They want something a little darker.
My observation on comedy is it's going two ways generally. There's a large group of people who seem to be, for lack of a better term, the mainstream, although I wouldn't say they're the majority, but they are the mainstream, who want more social justice and political-minded comedy. They want gender stuff in there. They want race stuff. Not racist. They want it like race issues. They want people almost like, they almost want philosophers or political pundits.
Wow.
In comedy.
I don't know how that would be funny.
Fuck, I don't know either, man. It's not my favorite kind of comedy, but a lot of people want it.
They want it, but is anyone doing it?
Lots. It's if you wanted to play it smart, it's kind of the way to go. Now, smart being make money and get acceptance and get booked and stuff like that. As a reaction against that, though, there's the stuff that people is like opposite of that.
Sure.
So making fun of taboo subjects, and not in a way where it's speaking to power or anything. It's a joke for a joke's sake, and they don't give a shit what the subject is. So it'll be race stuff, it'll be gender stuff, it'll be gay stuff, it'll be terrorist stuff, it'll be rape stuff, it'll be abuse
and that's
stuff.
what you do.
Yeah. I don't necessarily. That's just the shit I find funny.
Yeah.
It's the stuff I laugh at, right?
Yeah.
So when I'm a joke, I don't sit down really and like, okay, I'm going to write a joke. My mind produces jokes, and I just have to make sure I write it down when it comes into my head, right? That's just what comes out. Yeah. I mean, if I were to do your exercise and do the fucking Lifeline thing, I'd be like, oh yeah, I can see why he makes jokes about stuff like this, right? Like there's two terms in comedy. I don't like them, but for the sake of the conversation, punching up and punching down. Punching up is when you're like making fun of the government or the church or those in power or demographics.
The people above. Yeah.
Punching down is when you're making fun of oppressed groups or people who are victims. I tend to like the punching down.
Yeah.
I want someone to get hurt in my jokes. Right. Even if it's me. I don't give a shit if it's me, right?
Yeah.
But I want there to be, but some comedy philosophers will say there's no such thing as a victimless joke. Someone gets hurt. It's just which way is it directed at?
Punching up, punching
down. Yeah. I say punch whatever way you want. The only rule is make it funny.
Yeah.
Right?
It's got to be funny.
And the thing is about comedy, you want to optimize this as much as possible, but it'll never be 100% funny to 100% of the people.
Yeah.
So try and strive for
if you can get 85 people in a room to laugh, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
That's a good, and what most comics end up doing once they become fairly established, like the ones you could probably name, they have their own audience base. And now they basically are just going like, these are the people I want to please. I don't give a fuck if you don't like it, right? So, but then you got to make sure you challenge yourself too so you don't get lazy, right?
Sure.
It's just like music, right?
Yeah.
Like, Morbid
Can't write the same album.
No,
over
Morbid
and over.
Angel can't produce the same album every time, right? Like, or else you start going, oh, well, that sounded like Altars of Madness. We can't, you know, so, pulling the trigger.
Pulling the trigger.
Pulling the trigger, yeah. So you still, got any concerts coming up that you're looking forward to?
Well, I think there's something coming through. Enslaved is supposed to come through.
Yeah.
I'd like to see them.
Watane's coming again.
Watane is coming. I'd like to see, Witchery.
Nice, yeah. Awesome.
You know,
There's a festival
stuff.
called Modified Ghost that's going to be in town. It's Vancouver, one of Vancouver's only music metal music festivals. It's got a bunch of bands.
Yeah.
Can't remember off the top of my head. One that I want to see though is called Power Trip. They're a thrash metal band from Houston, or I shouldn't say Houston. They're from Texas.
From Texas?
Yeah.
Power
Sound really fucking cool.
Yeah.
Sound like a cross between Slayer and Razor. Do you remember Razor?
I love Razor.
Razor's
The first
fucking-
Razor. Yeah.
Razor's awesome.
Great Canadian band
Yeah.
for sure.
Sheepdog is the lead singer's nickname.
Yeah, I think I've heard. You mean of Razor?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they got Rob, a different guy, right?
I don't know who they have now. They were here.
Yeah.
They were actually part of that festival last year.
Was I there for that?
I don't know. They were at the Rickshaw, I think.
Yeah, at the Rickshaw. Was it Razor or
It was
Infernal Majesty? I saw Infernal Majesty one night.
Yeah. They opened for, last time I saw them, they opened for Nile.
Nile. Yeah, I don't think I saw them. Razor guy. I don't remember seeing Nile, but hard to remember all these different shows.
But Enslaved is one you want to see.
Yeah, I'd like to see Enslaved. I'd like to see, I've never seen one of those black metal bands like Watane or Immortal or Dark Throne or anything.
They put on an impressive stage show.
Yeah, you said that. Watane's the first time was pretty
It's
intense.
probably the most intense stage show I've
Yeah.
ever seen. Ever in my life. I couldn't fucking believe it. I couldn't believe it was allowed.
Yeah.
And apparently it wasn't.
Oh.
They ended up getting in trouble for it. They can't do that stage show anymore.
Yeah.
Like, it's
all the rotting meat and stuff.
venues won't book them if they do that stage show. Because it's like a health hazard.
Yeah. You gotta...
It was cool, though.
Yeah.
It was fucking cool.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, man.
All right, well, thanks for...
I'll just ask you my final question. I ask this of all my guests.
Sure.
For the average person listening, do you have any final words? Anything you want them to know?
Oh, well, heavy metal's